Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. All right, you jump in the chat there and tell us where you're tuning in from. That is the most fun part of this. Not the most fun. Obviously, the conversation is the most fun, but I love seeing where people are joining us from. Sarah and I are in Seattle. Tamar is in upstate New York. Where are you? Duval. Okay, Jennifer's in Duval. Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else? You can use the chat. We'll let a few more people get tuned in, and then we will get started. Oh, it's disabled. That's not okay. I don't know why that's happening. Let me look here. Yes, I can see. Thank you for letting me know that the chat is disabled. I don't know why that's the case. I don't see a way to change that here without logging us out. So we were just going to use the Q&A anyway. So we'll just do that. All right, and thank you for letting us also know that you're in Seattle. Okay, we are going to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Laura Hamilton. I have a cookbook shop here in Seattle called Book Larder, and we do a lot of in-person author talks and cooking classes in the shop, but we also occasionally host virtual events like this. When we have authors who are far away and don't necessarily get to visit us in Seattle, we welcome them virtually and get to welcome you from all over the world. So thank you very much for being here. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Tamar Adler. She is the author of the Everlasting Meal Cookbook, Leftovers A to Z. She is going to be in conversation with Sara Dickerman, a leftovers lover and expert herself. They are going to talk about the book. They are also going to leave plenty of time for questions. So please feel free to use that little Q&A button to ask any questions that you have. And I'm going to try to see if on the back end I can get the chat working just so you can talk to each other. We are also have the closed captions enabled. If that's helpful to anyone, you can activate those through the menu at the bottom of your screen. The book is also available at booklarder.com, and Tamar was kind enough to send us book plates. And so if you order the book from us and support the talk by doing that, you will get a signed copy. Thank you to everyone who's done that so far. And I will, once I get the chat working, I will drop a link in the chat so that you can easily access the book from there. And as always, we are recording the talk, so it'll be available on YouTube afterwards. And so if you have to jump off early or you want to share it with friends later, you can do it that way. All right, so I am going to turn things over now to Tamar Adler and Sara Dickerman.
Well, hello, everyone, and hi, Tamar. It's so great to meet you online. I've admired your work for so many years, and you and I share a great interest in leftovers
and beans. Right? Aren't you? You're a big bean fan, as am I.
I am a big bean fan too. Yes.
Beans.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I just would love to know, let's get started with thinking about how did that become an area that you dug into in your cooking and in your writing?
Well, I think it was from a few different places, but one of them, and I'm sure you as a cook relate to this, is just that so much of the cooking that I did in professional restaurants actually was a version of
Mhm.
using all of everything. And I think especially because I cooked at Chez Panisse in Berkeley, where like, I feel like everything we did with stale bread really deserved its own book, because we would use breadcrumbs, like fresh breadcrumbs, fried breadcrumbs with fried herbs, fried breadcrumbs with fresh herbs, croutons. We would make bread soup. uh we everything, there was like a toast with anything on it, and that was true with so much. We made all kinds of broths from all meat bones, and I was doing that kind of cooking professionally, and it was just sort of like rustic peasant cooking. And it was right around when I decided to leave Chez Panisse that I decided to write my first book, An Everlasting Meal. And it was very much about how using all of everything and sort of, meat and vegetable nose to tail cooking was really just cooking. And it's too often sort of miscast as like a belt tightening thing, when actually it's like how we were cooking at Chez Panisse. And so I think it came from just my culinary education, but then also from being a frugal person, and also from being somebody who loves to buy, the beautiful vegetables and carefully raised meat at farmers markets, and there's no way I could justify my purchasing preferences if I didn't get a lot of meals out of every single one of them. So it was this combination of like professional and personal practice, I think. And then feeling even over the 10 years since I wrote my first book and now wrote this sort of like follow-up cookbook version, feeling like there still wasn't enough knowledge out in contemporary American culture about how to make the most of everything we buy. And if you don't know how to make the most of it, it's really hard to buy it. It just feels, first, it feels bad to throw things out. It feels wasteful and hard to justify to spend however much money something costs. And so I was like, look, if this is not, and you're working on the same thing. So I'm sure you understand. It's just like wanting to shout from the rooftops, hey, you can, here are ways of using more of that. And yeah, I just decided to spend a lot of time on that rooftop.
Yeah, and I also feel like it's a creative springboard too. Sometimes I don't know what to cook, so having something left over gives me that little anchor point to think about what I'm going to do next. So I also see it as like kind of a prompt.
Yeah, or like I mean, you're also a writer. I think of it, I think it's so helpful in that exact way. And I have made the comparison before to like how hard it is to face a blank page versus how much more approachable a page with a bunch of text on it is. Like editing, once you've turned in the first draft of something, it's just like, oh, thank God, that's like absolute crap. But now I have something to work with, and so like that is, I think it's so much easier when there's something there. And then when there's nothing there, for sure.
Yeah, one thing I think we fight in the food media world is this sense that everything should be new. And it's not very and so I find that one of the things that's a challenge in home cooking in general is thinking about how to balance that sort of craving for novelty with a sense of frugality / just tradition and preserving, sort of a rhythm in your kitchen. I always think it's an interesting balance to try to strike.
Yeah, and I mean, somebody whom I was talking to about this book told me that they thought this new book, the Everlasting Meal Cookbook, that they thought of it as like the cleanup book for all other cookbooks. Like you could still go and get your new, beautiful, exciting cookbook with all of the like, rose petals and pistachios and like really cool chili from wherever, and like exciting new things. But then when you have some left over, you could use this, and like it's probably in there. And
Yeah.
I like the idea of being the cleanup crew. I'm totally excited by that.
Yeah, okay, and I don't know whether anyone can tell. I'm just trying to give people a sense of the scale. If you don't have the hand, I'm barely able to lift this up over my shoulder. It is so thick. It has everything, and it's not just like, I will say that it's just completely encyclopedic, and you have, one of the things I love is that there's like a lot of food that's not from a European or an American tradition worked in there. Can you tell me about, were you looking for leftover traditions in Asia and the Middle East, or were you just more like, oh, this is something I like to eat, and so how would I use these leftovers?
Both things. And then also, I very misguidedly, when I first started the book, I thought that I could include everything, like really everything. So it's so heavy and big now, and I wanted it to be even bigger. I mean, I didn't want it to be bigger, but there was like a point at which I was like looking up like Azerbaijani leftovers treatments, like every, like Druze leftover, like every single culture that I could think of, I was dead set on getting everything in. And I would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, realizing that like, that there were a lot of Palestinian dishes that like I hadn't gone deep enough into, like there's one Palestinian leftover, it's maftool. So I would wake up and just be like, I'm like blowing it. But then like eventually I ran out of time, and also my editor said I couldn't put everything in, like they wouldn't publish everything, and I couldn't find everything. And so I kind of gave up, but some of it was just going like, I know there's some amazing Burmese, there are like amazing, Burmese salads that I could imagine being useful for this. And so some of it was stuff that, that like I've eaten or leftovers I've had, I've been really lucky and been able to travel really widely. So some of it, I feel a lot of it's from personal experience because I've been lucky enough to travel a lot. And then I think that almost every culture has amazing leftovers ideas. And it makes me feel better to hear you say that it felt like there's a lot there, because I have been, like I think I've gone gray over what I've left out.
Of course, because that's always the problem with an encyclopedia, right? You can't actually include all the knowledge there is, but there's an awful lot of knowledge here, and an awful lot of like just exciting experimentation, and it's really fun to see. I think it's interesting also just thinking about leftovers. I think of leftovers as sort of an not American, but a sort of Western thing because of refrigeration, because of packaging. We tend to entomb our food a little more than other cultures, right?
What a great word. Yeah. I think also because I think that we also have become more tentative around them than other cultures, because we have this idea that like if we just, if we make it cold, and it's obviously scientifically true, right? It does inhibit bacterial growth, but there's not the same motivation to kind of go on using and transforming things, because they probably only have about 24 hours, before they expire, and you do need to use them. So I think like our sense of time is different, and our sense of danger is different, and our sense of familiarity is with the ingredient is different.
So let's get into expiration dates quickly, because I'm sure it's going to come up later. We know that expiration dates for most part are not rooted in real danger. So how do you make your judgment calls?
Not only do we know that they're it has now been definitively proven that they bear no specific relationship with health and safety, right? So like it might line up in some way, it might not. Any other variable also might be useful. I think it's really amazing and really important to remember that all of our senses evolved to help us make these decisions, and you can smell and touch and taste and see. And those are really, really useful. Your senses can't necessarily tell you everything, but there's nothing that can tell you everything. And certainly expiration dates are giving you very little information and very little relevant information. And so if you think about it in like not absolute terms, your senses are giving you a lot of relevant information. The dates are not giving you a lot of relevant information. So based on that alone, you should be using your senses. And I also read a paper recently. I linked to it in a Washington Post op-ed a couple of weeks ago, but I now don't remember where it was published. But if you find the Washington Post op-ed, the paper is linked to in it, it has also been proven that disgust is an evolutionary. Was that your dog being disgusted? Your dog's like, I hate disgust. That disgust is an affect that has evolved to help us avoid danger. And that's been proven by showing that we do end up like avoiding edible hazards in the presence of feelings of disgust. So like all of this stuff that we think like, I don't know why I feel like that that's evolutionarily useful. And that's what I encourage people to do. And like, that includes tasting, taking a little, and I think it's so useful, especially to taste, because you just do it once or twice and you will start, I feel like it's so freeing and so empowering, because if you taste something that has gone bad, you know immediately, right? Your whole body is like, no effing way, like no way, that's not good for me. And then you're done. And I feel like that, I find that so reassuring. And you probably had it with berries, right? Where like, if you taste a moldy berry, your whole body's like, and that's awesome that we have that. But also nothing happened to you after you tasted the moldy berry. You were grossed out for 30 seconds and then you moved on.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's like that difference between like a sort of wilty bunch of herbs versus like someone that's liquefying and slimy to like there's all those calibrations that you start to learn. Sometimes you taste things, I think also, and it's not that it's gone bad, but it just needs something more, often acid, right? So I think it's helpful to taste in that way too, because you're like, that makes those leftovers just more appealing, if you're trying to.
Right. Yeah. Tasting for like just tiredness is just as useful.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said acid, because that's like the waker up.
Yes. Never without citrus. Great. Well, let's get into some of the actual recipes. I think that Laura is sort of helping with some of the actual chapters, but let's walk a little bit through what you do in the book. You have your chapters are sort of kind of based on ingredient that could be a leftover in one form of like a pre-cooked thing, or it could be just a thing that's sort of alone in the veggie drawer looking a little sad. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, my definition was really expansive, and I included basically anything that could, like, whose potential might be hard to see in the, in the busyness of everyday life. And it is organized by type of leftover. So you're not just like adrift in the sea of my my slightly mad attempt to put everything that could be ignored in there, like all the vegetable things, whether they're cooked or bits and bobs, or like a weed that could be ignored, or all together. And then all the, unripe fruit and overripe fruit and fruit pits and fruit peels and cooked fruit and jam are all in one section. And then it kind of goes on like that. So the larger umbrella category of ignored thing is how it's organized. And then it's A to Z inside of each of those.
And one thing I like that I honestly in my leftover book did not do was you take on things that are already sauced, like coleslaw or lasagna, like something that's like a complex thing in and of itself, and then you reframe it. And I was like, that's so cool.
There's lasagna soup is in there, and it is so delicious. And if you think about it, of course it is, right? It's noodles and cheese and sauce and oil and herbs. And any constellation of those things is delicious. And the only thing that could go wrong would be like over softness, but it's soup. So everything's supposed to be overly soft. And it's just like, yeah, that's delicious. I think I also make enchilada soup. And they're all great. I mean, soup is great, but yeah, there are a lot of soft things. I made coleslaw. I made coleslaw soup. I made coleslaw gratin.
That sounds amazing. And I was like,
we're all good.
Yeah. And then you have a lot of funny writing on cabbage, which is like my favorite vegetable anyway. But you said that there's the cabbage is always ready to go.
I think I wrote there's no such thing as bad cabbage or rotten cabbage. I put it in very strong terms.
Yes.
But it's true. You just you cut, it's like, you're like, oh no, it all turned gray. And then you cut off the gray layer and you're like, oh my gosh, you look as good as you did yesterday.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. Cabbage is so amazing.
Yeah. Self-preserved.
Yeah.
And then you have some really fun thinking about drinks and stuff that you can revive. And I love that idea of sort of using a drink as a sauce or a marinade for the next thing too. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's I think a lot of the book is sort of me taking the step back that a lot of us don't have time to on a regular basis and going, well, a drink is a liquid, and a liquid is what we use to marinate or to cook in. And so we should just marinate or cook in it. And it, just because I had the time and space, because I was doing this project, to kind of go through and for every single thing, be like, could I use you? I had this, I think really rare opportunity to reframe a lot of, almost everything. And I, it seems kind of obvious now, but it took me a minute when I was writing the drinks chapter to realize that leftover iced tea was a perfect thing to make marbled tea eggs in.
Yeah.
Why not? And that, think of all the times you read a brownie recipe or a mousse, like a chocolate mousse recipe. The great ones are all like, use a tiny bit of coffee, of coffee. And so I just, started using a tiny bit of coffee and stuff. There were a lot like that. And then a good one, I think, was a little bit of leftover Bloody Mary mix to make I forget if I make a shrimp cocktail or if somebody might have just texted me that recently.
Oh no, we were chatting. That was when I was at the airport and I had like 2
months. Oh yeah, that was you. So that was your idea.
I was staring at half a Bloody Mary that I would be completely off my ass if I had drunk before getting on the plane. So I was like, okay, but too bad I can't take this in my purse and go. Yeah, you're like, or at least make a little shrimp cocktail with it. It would be perfect.
I mean, right. I love that. That's so, and I love that kind of shrimp cocktail too. It's like a Mexican cocktail.
Yeah, me too. Oh. It's so good.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to ask you, what's your relationship with the freezer? Is that a tool you use a lot in this world, or?
We have a very positive relationship. I feel like it's maybe not always the healthiest relationship, because I don't think that I think I go through phases of not treating it as kindly and being as good a steward as I might. Like I sometimes am not orderly enough. But right now, everything is in really nice order, and I feel like the freezers are happy and I'm happy and nothing is crammed in anywhere. But like I love, like not in a neurotic, my mom, not in a neurotic way, I think. Like my mom like buys or stores everything, and then her freezers are absolutely packed. Mine are more like they're not, there's like, I have chopped ginger in my freezer, and I have chopped Indian green chilies, and like and breadcrumbs and croutons, and those are like and now I have frozen mashed potatoes in little silicone ice trays, because I got this great recipe for cinnamon buns that has mashed potatoes in them. And it happened to be right after Thanksgiving that I got it. Or maybe, I don't know, somehow it was like during the winter and I had mashed potatoes. And so I was like, oh, well, I'm not going to make mashed potatoes again for a while. So I have a lot of frozen mashed potatoes. And then, everything else. So many frozen beans and frozen corn and so much jam, which I freeze so I don't have to pressure can it. But yeah, positive. Just I'm not nice enough, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, I know I have an organizational problem too. No, you mentioned labeling too. You sound like you have a mixed relationship with labeling. Are you now good? You're now good about it?
But that's a great use of good, right? Like I'm good, but that's not my value system.
Yep.
It is my husband's value system. I am like now, I feel like I've fallen in line, but I don't find my own life more pleasurable, except that he sighs less. There's less like every time he opens and closes things. I never thought it was like, I don't know, I just didn't bother me that I didn't necessarily know. I liked a little bit of mystery. But he really didn't like mystery, and I think it got really intimidating. So I do label. I don't do like dates or anything, but I do label the content of the container, because I mean, just to be happier and a better partner.
Yeah, and when you're sharing the space, you sometimes have to figure that out.
Yeah. Do you label?
I'm bad at it, and then I get sad because something will get pushed to the back too. It's partially because I know I should love glass containers, but I don't love glass containers, so I have these opaque ones. So that's the problem. Visibility is important, and so if something gets shoved to the back, I have a hard time.
And it's also hard that I have a lot of opaque ones too, that are like the metal ones from restaurants.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
That's what you have. And I love those, and they fit in everything really well, and they're wonderful, but it's really hard to get tape to stick to them too. In a freezer. In a fridge, it's fine, but it comes off in the freezer. And it's a dance.
Yeah, it is. And then tell me a little bit about like emotions. We were sort of touched upon it a little bit. I think it's obvious that you and I both really get excited by the idea of sort of like recognizing the potential of food. But I am sure you've encountered some people like I did who just say no to leftovers, and with quite a bit of emotion. Like, are you startled by that, or is that something that you've dug into at all?
I haven't. I want to hear about your experience.
I think it's about reframing a little bit. I think people think leftovers is like literally reheating something exactly the way it was the day before, which isn't my favorite either. I'd rather do something funny or good or refreshing with it. And so I think that that's where the emotion comes from. But I also sometimes think it's because people were forced to eat the same thing day in and day out a lot as kids for whatever reason. And that also maybe is just something they don't want to revisit.
Yeah. And, and also a sense of like, maybe I've worked my way out of having to do that.
Yes.
You know, I think
Yeah.
there is a certain, I don't know, I feel like there's a cultural privilege to thinking of certain saving practices as, you know, cucina povera, or like these wonderful practices, when I've come to them through not through need, but
Right.
through education. And I can imagine that if I had come to them through need, I don't know how I would feel about them. I just know that I have a different relationship to them than I would if I had had a different, you know, a different method of exposure to these practices.
So what are, I'm going to skip around a little more to technique now. You mentioned soups, like soups are one of the great savers of food, or revivers. What are some other sort of broader techniques? Like I always feel like there's like a matrix that can work for a lot of different things. So what are
Yeah.
some of your favorite of those?
I feel like we should go back and forth on this. I'm going to go with frittatising.
Yes.
Frittatatization. Really amazing and important technique, because I have still not encountered anything that doesn't make a good frittata,
Yeah, I'm
including,
with you.
right?
Yeah.
Knishes. I made a knish frittata.
That was wild. I saw that. And then you had Cal's, he had a French fry one, is that
French
right?
fry frittata. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what's a technique that you love? What's a go-to?
I mean, tacos, I mean, it's not surprising, but like tacos, really all anything needs is a little delicious salsa of some kind and a wonderful fresh tortilla. So that's a good one for me. And just sort of universally good for vegetables, good for meat, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw you had duck tacos in there. You had a couple other, tell me a couple other tacos you have in there that are.
I don't know. Anything could be a taco. I don't even
Yep.
remember. I think I had to take some of the tacos out because I was talking. You could always you could put it in a pan, add some water, and crack an egg into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's another great technique.
Yeah, and then I think salads are also great because salads are, at least the way we experience them here in this country, I think are like often made of lots of little things. So I think one of the tricky things with leftovers is sometimes you don't have enough for the whole family meal, whatever size your family is. So sometimes I often find it's lunch for me that I'm like using up what's left. And so that also is part of the reason I think it works well for me. So it's always about having a really nice vinaigrette that I know I can go to, either made ahead a little bit of time, or just something super simple like, mixing tahini with a little garlic and water and lemon, and then you've got a delicious dressing. And then, yeah, then you can use all the different parts, like it helps bring everything together. So,
yeah.
And one thing I do think that's helpful in terms of, I'm seeing a few like practicality questions come up. We'll get to questions soon. Is, if you can have washed your nice salad greens ahead of time, all that becomes easier. And some days I'm good about that and some days I'm not. But like if I get home and I've sort of rinsed this spinach that I got at the farmer's market and it's ready to go, instead of me having to then clean it when I'm improvising, it makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, it's so, I wrote about doing that like 10 years ago. I wrote an entire chapter, like a long chapter in my first book about like kind of getting ahead of yourself in a good way, like that, cutting and roasting a bunch of vegetables and cleaning all your salad greens and drying them. And it's still, it's still as hard. It's still hard. It still takes a lot of motivation to do. It was probably easier for me then because I wasn't a mother yet. And I still have to like summon a lot of motivation, and then the payoff is so good.
It makes you so happy when you're like, it's already ready to go.
I mean, having clean, dry salad greens is such a special thing because there's no way. I love having salads with like lots of delicious things in them, like lots of stuff, and often an egg on them too, even though it makes things wilty. I like that. I like when like an egg wilts, whatever. But I'm never going to do it at lunchtime. And lots of times I just won't, it's like, disagreeing with my son about something and it's almost time for dinner. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm not washing and drying salad greens at lunchtime. I'm not washing and drying them when my willpower is already almost used up. I pretty much have to do it when I have a full bucket of willpower and I'm not hungry for a salad.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other principle is just do like, if you're doing it for a meal, just do more.
Oh yeah, I always do it all.
Yeah, yeah,
Always.
just do more.
I never do half of it. Just do it all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oops, I startled my doggy there.
Oh.
Okay, I'm sure in your research you came across some of those vintage leftover books. What is the funniest recipe that you remember coming across?
They all kind of said the same thing. I mean, I didn't go. I actually spent very little time looking at them because they weren't going to be really useful. You know, they just say like make a white sauce and then bake it or turn it into a croquette.
Yes, there are a lot of croquettes for sure.
Yeah, and like sure, great, but that's we don't make as much white sauce or croquettes as they seemed to when they were writing those recipes. And plus I wanted to make stuff that people were gonna like make. You know, so I have a bunch of those books, but I didn't spend much time with them.
And yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously there was the Jell-O phase, but that was a short one. Shortish one. And yeah, it's interesting with croquettes, they are super delicious. I wish more people would do them, but I think Americans aren't frying as much. So at home, I think that could be a stumbling block, even for me too, but they're well worth it. And I saw you have a croquette recipe.
I have a few. Yeah, I love
They're
croquette.
so good.
Yeah, and I just made ham croquettes like 2 weeks ago. And I was just reminded of how unbelievably delicious they are, and you know, actually really easy. But I also have I love fried food and I love frying. I don't love the practice of frying, but like it just makes everything so good. And so I do it. You know, I remember that at one point Michael Pollan wrote an article about like how making French fries at home is such a pain that it's like if you just made it a rule that you would, you know, basically only eat French fries when you made your own, that would be much more useful than whatever, any other restriction you could place on yourself. And I think about it a lot because it's like I go out of my way to fry stuff all the time. And I was like, it doesn't really work for us. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with eating French fries. I think French fries are totally great and wonderful, but I make them like not infrequently.
That's yeah. Okay. Well,
I love them.
Yeah, it's all part of I mean, they're so worthwhile to do that way, right? So
and there's a recipe for sardine croquettes that was in my second book, which is the kind of unloved stepsister. And I put it in this book too, just because nobody read that one. And so I was like, well, maybe more people will read this one. And so I just put the exact same recipe in this book because it is, you just take mashed potatoes and canned sardines, and a little Calabrian chili. Try it. They're so insanely good.
And nothing like a little crust to make something seem fresh, right? Like just a little crispy crustiness.
Yeah.
Texture is so important in all this. And I know looking through your book, I see it in your croutons and you're in the crispy fried things and crisp fried shallots on top of something, you know, like all of that. I think to make things feel new again, texture is like just as important as taste.
Yes. I mean, it's part of taste, right? Yeah. It's often all you have to do.
Right. And like, I think you, even when you do read, I think in your macaroni and cheese, you basically just recrust it up, right? When you
add chopped arugula and breadcrumb.
Yeah.
But that does it. So then you have like taste grown up because of the arugula. It has some like
there's something green there.
And then no, totally. That's all I tried doing other things. I tried frying it and I didn't like it.
Oh yeah, that sounds like it would get hard.
Boring.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at some of these questions that I have to look at. First of all, this is not a question, but a comment, but it's a good one. Just have to say thank you, Tamar, for that fabulous stale Oreo recipe. The very, very best. So what is your stale Oreo recipe?
I think stale Oreos are good.
Yeah.
I think isn't that what I wrote?
Oh, maybe that's it.
I think I just say that I brought my book because I was like, there's so much in here. I probably forgot. Oh, mine's like stuck together with something. Oh no, it's not. Well, yes, it is. But I think that's stale Oreos are good. They're delicious.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd do with them would be to crumble them onto ice cream or mix into ice cream. So that's not really transformative.
Yeah. Okay, great. I wrote, this is what I think. I'm glad I am true to myself. I wrote, let's be honest, Oreos are good stale. They really are. I love when they get kind of like, because they get a little soft and they're just, oh, they're so delicious.
Okay. How would you help people cultivate leftover repurposing mussels as home cooks? I often make vinaigrette on Sunday, in part because it forces me to invent a new way to use it before the next Sunday. What other habits could help an individual build repertoire?
The vinaigrette one is a great idea. That's super smart. I think grinding breadcrumbs or toasting croutons are are both really good ones. And because then you have like sort of dual purpose because you've done something with your stale bread, and like breadcrumbs are great because you can use anything. Like the ones I made most recently definitely had like bagels and like the occasional sweet kind of like sweetened bread. And I was like, oh, I hope that this dried cranberry doesn't clog up my food processor. And it just like, got stuck on the thingy and then I took it off. And then once you use the bread and then also you have breadcrumbs, and I think a great thing to do is just really, think of them as like toppers for everything and texture for everything. I think keeping a pot on your stove that you can put vegetable scraps in can be useful if you're, okay making a small amount of stock after 2 days of it. Like if you just have carrot scraps and onion peels and garlic peels and like a bay leaf, I think that is a really helpful one. And then and I feel like rice is such an incredibly rewarding thing to repurpose that even if you just like focused your leftover energies on rice for a few weeks and got into like how good it feels to have different fried rices all the time.
Yeah, they're really, really good. And congee too.
Yeah.
Different texture, but both delicious, and I love them. They're so, I mean, I had a Chinese American roommate in college, and I had never heard of congee before, and we had a little rice cooker, and there were like 3 tablespoons of rice in the rice cooker left, and she's like, let me just add some water, and like an hour later we had like this incredible meal.
Do you still make it?
I do. I mean, and now I would make it with broth because I have broth around, but at the time it was fine, and we just put tinned fish on top of that water made congee. Yeah, just that one's, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit before, but it's often about the toppings there, because you're like, oh, tiny mints of garlic, I mean of ginger on there, and some scallions, and then whatever odds and ends, and that's where it really gets to be fun and exciting. It's really a blank canvas. Okay, here for you. In your travels, have you found particular cultures that do leftovers well or some that don't? My food background is heavy in family style meals and communal cooking and sharing, so leftovers are very common, but here in the States, many in our circle think leftovers are lackluster. Do you have thoughts on this?
My best friend is Italian and married to an Italian, and they're I mean, they wouldn't even think of them as leftovers, but nothing gets thrown away in their house, and like everything is made into a broth and everything is saved. So I feel like in my travels, I've noticed that Italian culinary culture is very, very preservative. I lived in Bangkok for a little bit, and the leftover rice would be turned into congee, which I think is also common in China. And I loved the way eggs, and I do love the way eggs are used in Chinese cooking as a more sort of central ingredient, where you could have like just egg and tomato on rice. You could get that in a restaurant. Those were all really good. Indian food has so many amazing leftovers applications. I love those. Yeah, I think so much of it is just like what you've been able to be exposed to, and what delicious food you've eaten that has been made of something that could otherwise be seen as something that you could discard. I think that in lots of framing it even as a leftover is I think is a very American idea, as opposed to just framing whatever it is as food. Mm-hmm. Like, as long as it's edible, it's food to be used. And maybe the fact that we don't, a lot of Americans don't have a ton of exposure to cooking and a ton of experience cooking makes it harder to sort of see food on an arc like that. But I think a lot of other cultures do.
Mm-hmm. And to think, I mean, and this is maybe less cultural and more that restaurant background, but to think modularly about what you've got and what you could do with it, combine and all the little components you have. Okay, let me see. How do you develop a recipe? Let's say you have leftover X. How do you begin to think about how you might develop that recipe around it?
Well, for this book, I would usually taste it, and then I would look through some books where I thought I might find something that would, inspire me in some way. If it were a noodle, I would look in cookbooks from cultures where noodles are pretty prominent, or if I read a lot, I would just kind of like taste what it was and then do a little reading and come up with a few ideas. Like, should this be, there's like a limited number of things that even make sense to do with any one thing. Like, to use the example of lasagna, like I could make this into a frittata, but we know that anything could be in a frittata. So they're, like I could bread it and fry it, but why? I couldn't really make it into a salad. So I would kind of think through stuff and then read a little, and then kind of go with whatever made sense. And sometimes it just didn't work, but then sometimes it did. Lasagna soup works.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't wait to try that. I would have done it in time, but then I was like, oh my gosh, I had to make the lasagna and then make the soup from it.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Problem of developing recipes for leftovers.
Welcome to my life for several years. And like, I live in upstate New York, so I'm not like in, I wrote my first book and some of my second book living in Brooklyn, where like if I had written this one in Brooklyn, I could have just gotten samosas delivered to my house, or lasagna delivered to my house, or whatever. But I had to make everything. I didn't make the knishes. I got frozen knishes at ShopRite, but almost everything had to be made.
Yeah. Speaking of being homespun, do you have chickens to get your eggs? Is a question here.
Oh, I wish. My husband is allergic to just about everything. I'm making him sound like such a sour. He's the most wonderful man in the world. He's so amazing. But he is really allergic to like all animals. And so Oh, and we live in the city in upstate New York. We live in Hudson. So it would be, I would have to get special dispensation to have chickens, but also he's really nervous about like whether they would affect his health. I don't want that to go badly for him.
I'm sure you know where to get nice eggs though.
Oh yeah, we've got so many great ones.
Okay, this is a great one, and this is a problem that I have a problem with sometimes too. Canner here with way too much jam. Love it for baking, but also get bored. Any savory or creative ideas for jams and preserves?
I use them. I think most of our jam goes into smoothies. We, instead of buying, like, we do have some frozen fruit from the summer every year. So we end up with some frozen fruit, but because I make so much more jam and it's such an efficient way of storing fruit. What we end up doing is using just like the bananas that are going brown. We freeze those, and then there's a really good idea in the chat. So we freeze those, and then our smoothies are jam, frozen banana, and yogurt. And that uses a lot of jam, like sometimes more than you want to. And then I also do brush the bottom of any tart with jam, before putting on breadcrumbs. But somebody in the chat, I couldn't read the whole thing, but said something about mustard and jam.
Jam and mustard mixed and brushed on chicken.
Yeah.
Jam on grilled cheese, jam vinaigrettes. So Jennifer is cooking with jam.
Cooking with jam. Amazing.
That's great. And there's an old silver palette recipe I remember that had orange marmalade in it. And I was thinking about that because I just made a big batch of marmalade that I should retry too. They often stirred some into savory sauces, just to, you have to be careful, I think, only with the sugar content. You want to make sure if you're not to use so much. I think in a savory context, you want to balance that out with salt and acid. But yeah, that random jams on ricotta toast.
Oh yeah,
Mr. Snack. Everyone, see you're all over this in here. Okay. This is a good, very practical one. Speaking of croquettes and frying, I do fry, but it's a hurdle. I do strain the oil. Any tips on setup and cleanup to make it a little less daunting?
No, it's a total pain. I mean, it's a total pain. I would say but you can answer, maybe you have a better answer. The only thing I would say is the thing that matters the most and makes it like the thing that I find most helpful is committing to straining the oil well. So like I use a chinoise, and if I have cheesecloth or a paper towel, I line it with that and then strain the oil through that, just because it's really, I find it like really discouraging when I've gone to all the trouble of like frying, making something delicious, letting it cool, straining it, and then the oil goes rancid because there were floating in it. And so straining it well, I find this with bacon fat and chicken fat and pork fat too, that like, even though it takes longer, when it's well strained, then it can store well, and then you can use it again. And that feels good. No, it's a pain. Listen to good music. I end up leaving the fry oil on the stove for like 2 days. Sometimes it gets like moved and then moved back, letting it cool, and I'm avoiding it.
The only other thing I know, I had to test a whole bunch of Chinese American recipes this summer, and I wasn't a wok cook really before. Like I had a wok, but it wasn't my go-to thing. Using a wok means that you can use a little bit less oil if it's the quantity that's an issue. Sometimes, to get it depends on how much you're doing. But instead of filling that big cylindrical pot, you're getting the depth without necessarily getting the using quite as much oil. So that's my only hot tip. Okay. Okay, here's one. what's a good rule of thumb for number of days it's okay to repurpose baked chicken pieces?
Chicken?
Yep.
I don't know the rule. I don't know. I wouldn't, I think that I, to the degree that I can say this, I think it's better to not outsource those decisions, because I don't think that, I don't think, because then you're not using your senses. I
Mhm.
wouldn't do a rule of thumb. I would, if you want to, if you want to like taste it every day for 3 days, or if I wouldn't, it probably will start to like go sour and taste bad after a few days. So I would, with, certainly with meat, I would try to use it sooner. If something is coated in fat, it stays good longer. If something has less water in it, it stays good longer, because water is oxygen, and oxygen hosts bacteria. But I would, I don't think I have a rule of thumb. I think I have a like, better to keep it on you and taste it and make it, make it like open up my book or Sarah's book, or find ideas for
Mhm.
chicken as soon as you put the chicken away.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I'd add is if you think it's going to be a long time, pluck it into smaller pieces and put a little chicken broth and throw it in the freezer.
Yeah, great, yeah.
Just because, I mean, if that's where you think you're like, I'm not going to get to it till the end of the week, I'd just do that, and then you have something nice rather than something that's iffy. Yeah, but I 100% agree that all this, that the whole exercise of this book and just learning how to be more comfortable with this stuff is learning how to observe and make decisions on your own, based on your own opinion too, and trust yourself. Okay, we're getting close to our wrapping up. I have a fun, just like a problem someone sent to me. Giant Costco size jar of sun-dried tomatoes and oil. Done lots of Indian dishes, pizza, pasta, eggs, sandwiches, done. What else?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And they're already sun-dried. It's like you can't even like make them any more dense. What happens if you, oh wait, could you do, what about pureeing them? And like, what about a gazpacho style thing? I think you could puree them into various sauces, right?
Maybe even soften them a little. Like I might, like, depending on how chewy they are, you could get a textural thing by, straining them and putting hot water on them.
Yeah, rehydrate them.
Yeah.
Puree them. Yeah, I like that. For gazpacho or salmorejo, which is another really great tomato bread soup. Pesto. I love sun-dried tomato pesto.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That sounds good. That's delicious to me. And just like playing that texture, like also I just look at it and I'd be like, have you been using them whole? Then maybe sliver them, maybe,
Right.
like, I know that sounds like kind of goofy, but that you can get a very different feel from doing some of that too.
Yeah.
And I'm maybe working them into some, I feel like there might be like I don't know whether you're a bread baker, but I also think there's probably a very 1980s style bread you could make with some chopped sun-dried tomatoes in there and some olives. It might be kind of yummy, or focaccia.
Yeah. Or but along those lines, right? Like savory scones, or like cheese and sun-dried tomato scones would be really good.
That would be good. Yeah. Yeah, go. I was mentioning the silver palette earlier.
Right. Just back that book. Right. Exactly. In braises, like tomatoey.
Oh yeah, like
chicken cacciatore, but yeah, right. I do think rehydrating them a little and getting them, a little bit softer would be a good to do.
And then the other thing I might do is like, I'm not an expert, but there's a whole dried dried vegetable and dried tomato tradition, like in Turkey. So I might just pull out a Turkish cookbook and take a look at what they're doing with those two, and get some yummy sauces going
I
that
didn't
way.
even know that. That's so great to
Yeah.
know.
If I haven't been to Turkey myself, but I've been to Athens, where there are Turkish shops, and hanging from the ceiling, they'll have these garlands of dried vegetables, dried tomatoes, dried eggplant, dried peppers, hanging just like dry, like
Whoa.
completely dry. And so there's all sorts of lovely uses for them. So that would be a recipe, a cookbook I might go to look for. Okay, I think we're really just about wrapping up, but this is a question that someone asked, and I think it's a fun one. I had a little preview. What did you end up having to eat today?
I went out to lunch, which is very unusual for me, but I hadn't seen my mom in like 2 weeks because I've been on book tour. And we have a wonderful local restaurant called Cafe Mutton. And we went there for lunch and had such an amazing lentil mushroom soup. It was brothy. It was like really brothy. And the chef Shayna put in some chicken fat, and it was maitake mushrooms. It was amazing. And then we had a chicory salad with anchovy dressing and a lot of grated cheese on it and croutons and breadcrumbs, toasted breadcrumbs. That was so good. And for dinner, I made arepas and cheesy arepas, and then I had avocados that I brought back from LA in my suitcase. So we had really good avocados. And then my husband had he really loves Japanese sweet potatoes, and so he while I was gone, he cooked almost all of them, but one of them our kitchen's a mess, and one of them got like hidden under something. I found it today. It was like a kind of wizened Japanese sweet potato. And then I also found 2 shriveled potatoes with lots of eyes. So I chopped all of that up together really small and sauteed it in ghee to put in the arepas also. And then I pickled, I found a half a shallot and some fennel that must have been sliced like before this book even came out, which was on March 14th. It was all curling in funny directions. So I cut off the brown pieces and the shallot seemed fine. So I cut up everything gross, sliced everything thin, and pickled it. And that was dinner.
It sounds wonderful. And I want to eat at your house someday.
Come eat at my house. I would love that.
And thank you so much for spending this hour with us. It's so
Oh.
fun to talk. I feel like we could go on and on. I know there's more questions that we couldn't quite get to, but thanks everyone who came out. And here's Sara.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much, Tamar and Sarah. That was such a fun conversation. I feel very inspired, and I know we got lots of great comments from people sharing ideas and getting inspiration themselves. Tamar, congratulations on another really fantastic book. And it seems like you could do like many volumes of this encyclopedia as time goes on. So just a thought, just keep adding on, right?
Good. All the stuff I left out. I would love that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Again, we'll put this up on our YouTube channel. And happy cooking, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Laura.
It was great.
Thank you, everybody who came. Bye.
Bye.